Attention! Choreo, a better way to connect with loved ones who are incarcerated. Without Choreo, family and friends wait for a call and hope they can answer. With Choreo, inmates can call or message at any time. When your inmate calls their Choreo number, they will hear your voice and text messages. Inmates receive and leave messages at any time using standard prison phones, making connection easy and predictable. For information about Choreo, visit choreo.org. Stay connected.
Welcome to the Prison Pod, a podcast for all people experiencing incarceration. The mission of this podcast is to save lives, restore hope, reduce suffering, and recidivism. Many show ideas come directly from the listeners, so please write the host. Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine, 04473. Here is your host, Ms. Valerie.
Welcome to the Prison Pod. Today, Paula Fox is joining us in the studio. Paula is involved in several prison ministries, which she became involved with because of her own son's incarceration. She leads a great program that I'm interested in called Jump Start Employment Reentry in North Carolina, which is a 40-week program inside to help people find gainful employment upon release. I do want to say that we have a content warning today. This podcast may have conversations of sexual content and offenses, so please use your own discretion. Thank you so much for joining us today, Paula.
Thank you for having me.
So, Paula, I'm going to start with your work first, and then we'll work backwards, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
I'm really interested in your work that you do with the Kairos. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about what Kairos is and how you go in and work with the women with that program?
So Kairos is a prison ministry, and essentially female volunteers go into female prisons, male volunteers go into male prisons. It's actually an international program. Kairos has been around for a long time. Specifically, I go into a correctional institute in North Carolina for women, and we go in once a year. It's a 4-day retreat is what we call it. And the best way to describe it is it's kind of an introduction to God. You know, it is a Christian-based, faith-based program. And it goes from Thursday afternoon through Sunday afternoon. The volunteers come in each day. They go home in the evening, come back the following day. And it's filled with all sorts of talks. The volunteers give talks, and then there's a discussion after the talks. We also provide meals, which is always very popular with everyone. We have a lot of great faith-based praise music, very uplifting. And really the message that we want the women to take home, or, even the men who attend men's weekends, is really that nothing that they've done can separate them from the love of Christ. And that, we worship a God of mercy and forgiveness. And a lot of them don't really know that. A lot of them are in a place where, society has told them that they're not worthy of forgiveness, but we want them to know that God has a different message for them.
I think a lot of people are kind of afraid to approach that because when you have a misconception on religion and God, a lot of people think of a punishing God. And I think that they forget that, at least in my case, my God's a loving and forgiving God.
Amen. Same for me.
And how long have you been doing that work with the Kairos?
So Kairos, I started doing it when I was living in New York. So at this point in time, it's probably been about 7 years total between New York and now in North Carolina.
I really like the idea of sharing meals together because that's a good way of us bridging a lot of gaps, having conversation over a meal.
Yeah, and it's a really unique setting with Kairos. The way it's set up is you essentially have a family, and each table is a family table. And so you really spend the entire weekend with your family. And the way it's set up is there's 6 volunteers and there's 6 women as well. And so you have, typically a woman to the left of you, a woman to the right of you who's a resident at the facility. And so you really get to know your table family very well throughout the weekend. And again, you're sharing the meals together. And they're typically meals that they're very different than what they typically are used to inside of a prison. So, we try to make sure that we're bringing them food that they would consider comfort food, right?
So you're able to bring the food in. It's not prison food.
It's not prison food. Yeah, we're able to, each facility in each state has different rules, but essentially they have to be an approved vendor, that we're purchasing the food from. And then, we have it delivered and we serve it like that. So,
I like that idea.
yeah.
And I'm sure that's a big hit inside because that prison food gets boring really fast and it's not very good. I've
Yes.
had the opportunity to have a few prison meals when I was doing work inside because we would be there all day and that was our
Yeah.
options.
Yeah.
So, and you also are involved with the Crossroads Prison Ministry. Is
Mhm.
that just letter writing or is that Bible study that you do with them?
It's both. And so the individual who is participating will receive a Bible study and they'll answer the questions in the Bible study. And then they will then send their Bible study and a letter to their mentor. And then their mentor you don't really grade the Bible study, you kind of comment on it, you kind of provide your own perspective, insights, maybe some additional Bibles verses for them to follow up on. And then you'll write them a letter as well. And so I've been doing that for several years as well.
I would think that they really look forward to that because getting a letter is very special. Anyway, today,
Yeah,
I mean, we do so much through
yeah,
text messaging and
yeah.
voicemail, but to be able to have the physical letter and to have the conversation, to have a different input, to see if others feel the same as you or if they feel differently about a certain topic. And Jumpstart. Jumpstart sounds. Now, is this something that you were involved in developing or you're just leading this? I don't want to say just leading the program because.
No, so Jumpstart actually started in South Carolina, and it actually started individuals who were actually incarcerated started the Jumpstart program. They essentially saw where individuals were, they continued coming back to prison. So these were individuals who had long-term sentences, right? And so they would see people coming and going, right? And they would return to prison and they would think, what's wrong, right? So they actually developed this curriculum inside of prison and then started, having other individuals participate in the program. And it is a faith-based program, but it's not only faith-based, it's also character building. There's some particular values that Jumpstart really believes in terms of teaching the individuals things like accountability, respecting authority, responsibility. And so the curriculum is really, kind of based around how do you help these individuals develop some of these character traits to prepare them for when they're going home? So it is a 40-week inside program, and we utilize the curriculum that was developed by these individuals who were incarcerated, but we also utilize the Purpose Driven Life book by Pastor Rick Warren. And the Purpose Driven Life has 40 chapters in it. So each week the men will read and, answer questions based on the chapter. And so it's really helping them to discover their purpose because many of them, have been searching for their purposes in the wrong places, right? So it's really been a very transformative program. And in South Carolina, they have been following the individuals who've graduated from that program and returned home. And the recidivism rate is only 4% for individuals who have gone through this Jumpstart program compared to state and national recidivism, which is, oftentimes in the 30% range. And so, they kind of discovered there's something to this. We decided, we not only want to have this program in South Carolina, we want to spread this program throughout the United States. And so the second state that they launched the program in was North Carolina, which is where I live. And so I got involved in Jumpstart. I'm actually one of two co-leads at a prison here that's about 20 minutes from my home. So I go there each week with 6 or 7 other volunteers, and we're, helping to facilitate this 40-week program inside this prison. But in addition to the inside program, they also want to make sure that we're coming alongside our graduates when they're coming home to provide them with things like housing, employment, etc. And in South Carolina, they have a bit of a different model than we have here in North Carolina. In South Carolina, they're essentially centralized in one area of the state, and they actually provide housing right there for their graduates. They have a housing setup that Jump Start provides to their graduates. And then they have several relationships with employers in that concentrated area. But in North Carolina, we decided we really want it to be kind of statewide. And so what we're doing is we're partnering with housing organizations that provide transitional housing for individuals coming home. We're partnering with them to help place our graduates. We're basically saying, hey, our graduates are going to come out and they're going to be prepared to be successful. Here's our recidivism rate, right? Here's what they've gone through in this program. They're going to be a cut above the, other individuals coming out of prison. So the housing organizations really want to place our graduates in their housing. And then with employment, that's the pillar, if you will, that I lead. What we're doing there is we're working partly with Honest Jobs to help our individuals find jobs through Honest Jobs, which is a platform that employers can post jobs where they're willing to hire individuals with a criminal record. But we're also developing relationships and partnership with different employers throughout the state that, if we have someone coming home, let's say in the Charlotte area, where we can pick up the phone and call that employer partner and say, hey, we've got someone coming home. They've gone through our program. They have to graduate from the program, right? And we feel confident, we can't guarantee that they're going to be successful, but we feel pretty confident based on their progress in the course and the change that we've seen in these individuals that they're going to be successful. And so that's the program, that I not only do an inside, program, help lead the 40-week program, but I'm also helping to set up the outside employment pillar for our graduates as well.
That is so needed. And there's other states that should follow suit with those programs because you're covering all the bases there. And one of the things that I like about that 40 weeks before is there's some consistency there with the volunteers going in, which makes the people that you're working with feel that they're worth it, that you're going in there week after week, month after month to help them be successful. And, it's hard enough to believe in ourselves anyways, let alone if you've had to deal with being in prison. So I love the idea of that program.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break here to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Prison Pod. I want to remind our listeners that we have Paula Fox in the studio, and we've been talking about her wonderful work she's doing with prison ministries within the state of North Carolina. I had a quick question about the Jump Start. Is that men and women that you're working with, or is it still just women?
So the unique thing about Jump Start is you can be a female or male volunteer and go into either male prisons or female prisons. So it's a little slightly different than Kairos. Right now in North Carolina, we are only in male prisons, but we are going to be starting in some of the female prisons in North Carolina as well. We went from just being in a couple prisons, and I believe in 2026, by the end of this year, we're going to be in 20 prisons in North Carolina. So we continue to grow.
How was it that you happened to get into doing prison work? We all have our stories of how we get here. So I'm curious if you would like to share a little bit of your story.
Sure. So my son is incarcerated. He's actually been incarcerated twice now. And the first time he was incarcerated, I would pray for him daily. I continue to pray for him daily. But specifically, a prayer that I had for him was, God, place other Christian men and women in his path who help guide him to you, right? Certainly as his mom, I was doing my best, but you know how it is with the parents, they don't listen to us. So that was a prayer that I had for him. And one day I was praying that, and I really felt like God placed it on my heart to be that someone for someone else's loved one, right? If I was expecting someone to go in and help my son and be a volunteer and to talk to him about the love of Jesus and how he could live a different life, then I needed to be willing to do the same for someone else's son or daughter or husband or uncle and I really was exciting to me. I didn't hesitate at all. I think that very day I started Googling, the different things online to find, where could I, volunteer? And that's what opened the door to Kairos initially. And I just continue to find different prison ministries over the years and I just keep raising my hand.
Do you find it more difficult to work with men or women? Is there one that's easier for you than the other?
I think women tend to be more open with their emotions and with sharing. And sometimes when you've been through trauma, as much as, we are not mental health counselors by any stretch of the imagination, but sometimes you have to open the door a little bit to the hurt and the pain to be able to then let God come into those places in your life that need healing. And so I think sometimes men are a little bit more hesitant to share, which makes it a little harder to have that breakthrough. At least that's been my experience.
It's funny because I found just the opposite, not with the sharing, but I found it was easier to work with the men than the women.
Mm,
It and I think it was only because the type of work I was doing and the groups that I was working with, I had women that had very long sentences.
mhm,
And so sometimes there was conflicts between the women more than there
mhm.
were between the men. So that was really the only difference. But I loved working with both.
Yeah,
I love doing prison work. People think you're crazy when you say that, but I've met some of the most phenomenal people inside a prison.
complete.
Now, I know that you are married. Does your husband do any prison work?
He does not, unfortunately.
Mine doesn't either, but well, I say mine doesn't. He does indirectly.
Mm.
He ends up meeting a lot of people who come home, so I can't say that he doesn't.
Same here. We've had a couple graduates who have come home from Jump Start. And, I'll do things like pick them up and take them to the library so they can use the computer, take them to the reentry center so they can get some other services set up. And he usually will come with me. We took one of them out to dinner recently, and, my husband came with me.
Yeah, and I think I know that different states have different rules and regulations because as volunteers, I know in the state of Maine, it used to be, I don't know if it still is, that you weren't supposed to have anything to do with them when they came home if you volunteered in the prison. And the work that we did reentry work and we did work when they came home. So we couldn't agree to that policy. But I
Right.
think if you've been consistent in somebody's life for especially years, I mean, sometimes you know these people for years.
Yeah.
When they come home, they need us. They really do. They need those people that have been consistent in their life and the people that believed in them.
Agree completely. And one of the other pillars that we're currently setting up for Jumpstart is we're also going to be starting a mentorship program where each individual coming home from prison will have a mentor that he or she can count on, so that when they have those, because they're going to run into challenges, right? There's going to be pitfalls. And we want to make sure that there's someone to come alongside them when that happens to encourage them to maybe, open up some of their doors, find other resources for them, and just be that cheerleader for them truly.
I would love to see them start doing a farm program in every state to teach people not only to grow their own food, but also to provide fresh fruits and vegetables to prison facilities and to community shelters so that there's those types of meals going in. Teach them how to raise chickens. And, I'm a vegetarian, but, the whole idea of the protein and eggs, real eggs,
Yeah.
because I can remember that's one thing so many guys wanted when they came home. They wanted breakfast. I want real
Yeah.
eggs, not powdered eggs.
Yeah, yeah. I actually volunteered at a prison in New York where they had a program where they grew vegetables and fruits. They did not utilize them in the prison, though. They sold them to outside, people. And I just thought it was so odd because, here they need to have fresh fruits and vegetables
I
inside the
know.
prison. It's sorely lacking. And so it just seems so, so odd to me.
And there's such a need for it now, especially if you think about how many of the migrant workers we're losing not being allowed to come into the country. We're
Sure.
going to need somebody to do those crops. And there's a lot of people coming home that I hate to say are unemployable, but they have a harder time getting jobs. And if they had these community gardens where you had community people and community farmers, they become part of the community rather than being separated from it. People get to know them on a different level. And I don't know if you've ever done gardening, but when you get in the dirt and you're outside and you hear the birds and you smell the air and the ground, and then you see the growth, there is such a wonderful feeling in that. It's creative.
I think any way that we can get these individuals into their communities where they're working side by side with community members and they have an opportunity to see them as a human being, I think that's a piece that's really lacking, and that's something I'm really passionate about is really helping our communities to understand that these people are human beings and they're coming back to our communities, and it's up to us to welcome them home and to help them be successful. And they're not the labels that the media puts on them, right? They're human beings first and foremost. And, I think if they're able to just have that insight into, working side by side with them in any capacity, their eyes will be opened, similar to when someone, volunteers in a prison for the first time, right? They walk through the door and they're scared, but by the time the weekend ends, they're like, these people are my best friends,
It's funny because I tell people, I've been to weddings. Actually, I've performed a couple, and I've gone to the hospital with brand new babies. And sadly, I've also been to funerals. But, I've done this work. I first started doing prison work in 1997. So
Yeah.
it's been forever and a day.
Yeah.
But I don't do any in-prison work anymore. Well, I say I don't. This is my in-prison work. So, are there any topics or things that we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about?
Certainly, I mean, we can talk about, not specifics, right? But certainly we can, kind of discuss the fact that my son, his crime is a sex offense. I don't like to call him a sex offender because I think that's one of those really negative labels.
It is.
And it's a label that, unfortunately sticks with him. And, I think that has been in itself is really a unique challenge. My son will even say, he'll read magazines. Let's say he receives a magazine called Victorious Living. And he'll read the magazine, and there's a lot of stories of hope and transformation, people who have really, turned over their lives to God and become new individuals, right? And or new life in Christ, let's say. But oftentimes they're never individuals who have had a sex offense. They're individuals who maybe have had, have committed murder or different drug crimes and things like that. But he's not seeing people like him. Right. And so he's questioning, is it possible for me to be able to change? Because I'm not seeing or hearing these stories. I know they're out there. I know there are people who have turned their lives around, who have made that decision, to give their life over to Christ. And it's just like a drug addiction, right? That, had these, sex addictions or, whatever it was that drove you down this particular path. And I know that there's nothing impossible for the God that we worship. I know that these individuals are out there, but we have this stigma around sex offenses so that people are afraid to speak up. They're afraid to say, I went to prison for a sex offense. And so it's just, for me, again, I think it's important for us to have this conversation to normalize, yes, there are people in prison and there's people who've come home from prison who've committed sex offenses. That's not who they are, right?
Right.
And if we don't provide them with opportunities to work and to live and rent apartments and all of these things, how do we expect them to ever get better? How do we expect them to really believe in the hope of being able to transform their lives and be new lives in Christ when the community that surrounds them has basically ousted them for life?
Well, that's one problem, like with the registry. It does not, I mean, there are so many different levels when you're looking at an offense. And the idea that we have a registry that we put somebody on there for the rest of their lives, but somebody who's committed murder, there isn't a registry for them. Or somebody who's broke into 6 houses in your neighborhood, which is probably much more of a risk. I think also that they have looked so much into protecting us out here when sex offenders come home, and I don't like that term, but when they come home, rather than looking at what are the root problems, how did this start? In putting more money into research and programming and support rather than total ostracization.
Completely. My son, when he came home the first time, he had to do mandatory sex offender counseling. But essentially, the counseling was always in a group setting. And that's very uncomfortable for people, especially when they're meeting with individuals they don't know. They're strangers to them. And that makes it very difficult to be open about challenges that you're having, right? So he didn't open up about the challenges he was having. And unfortunately, that, he ended up back in jail again and now will be serving another prison sentence, because he didn't have the ability to raise his hand and say, I'm struggling, I need help. And even when we talked about it and I said, if you had met one-on-one with your counselor, he was afraid even then. There's just such a stigma around it. And it's just really such a shame that they're not getting the help that they need.
And I don't think we see peer support in that area like we do in other areas of addiction and recovery.
Completely agree. And that's actually something I had a discussion the other day with my son about. I said, why can't you be the first person, right? Why can't you be the
Oh
first
my
person,
word.
right?
Yes.
To raise your hand and say, yes, I went to prison for this, right? But that doesn't define me. Look at who I am now. And I want to help others who are in that same position. So that's really been instead of looking for the other people who maybe have turned the corner that you can emulate, be the first.
Yeah, be the one.
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. Use the time, do some research and write. Oh my goodness, it is so needed. And I think that the younger the person is, the better because they can relate to people their own age, rather than it seems like a lot of people that have talked about it now it's coming out more than it used to. They tend to be older people. I do want to make a mention that the Hinda Institute, I don't know if you're familiar with them or not,
No.
but the Hinda Institute has some very good programs that have worked with people that have been have had to go to prison for offenses around sex offenses. And they're very loving and accepting people. So anyone who is has a family member that's involved or somebody who's been through it themselves should reach out to them because they are excellent, excellent people. They biggest hearts around.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been very happy to see that the Jewish people have a lot of different thoughts and feelings about incarceration and rehabilitation. They
Mm.
believe it is society's problem. So I want to ask you, how has it been for you as a mom to be supportive and give your son what he needs being there?
Yeah, it's been really challenging. I would say his first sentence, he was in prison for about 7.5 years. I really took it upon myself to make sure that my son came home saved. It was almost like in my mind, I could accept what had happened as long as he came home and had, a good news story, right? Because you read all sorts of stories about people who've turned their lives around. That was going to be my son. And I put all of my energy into it. And when he went back to prison, it was like I had just someone just came and hit me with the baseball bat, right? Because everything I had hoped for, everything I'd worked so hard for to make sure that he was saved, just from the littlest things, like each letter I would write to him, making sure I sent him just the right Bible verses, or, I was sending him the right devotionals in the mail, or, encouraging him to do this or encouraging him to do that. And so it was a really big disappointment to me when he went back. But I think I realized that, I think God was really showing me that it's not under my control. I don't have the ability to save my son, right? My job is very different, right? My job is to love him, to make sure he knows I love him and I support him. My job is to pray for him, right? But that's where my job ends. And I need to make sure I get out of the way to let God do his work in my son. And I need it to be God's timing as well. I have to trust in his timing. I hope after this prison sentence, he comes home and he's a changed man and never goes back. But maybe it will happen again, right? I don't know when it will happen or how long it will take, but I'm now to trust in the process and just allow myself to be his mom. And it's taken a huge burden off my shoulders, because when you think you're God, it's you're trying to do work that's essentially impossible.
Exactly.
And so, that was challenging. And, when he came home, it was challenging because I wasn't prepared. at all, as much as I thought I was prepared to take him in. Um, he came to live with us. He lived with us for about 8 months before he finally found someone who was willing to rent an apartment to him. And it was such a challenging time. I mean, he was fired from so many jobs because in the beginning, he had kind of decided, I'm not going to tell them about my criminal background, right? And he didn't lie on applications or anything, but most of these places were places that didn't even have you fill out an application, right? Or they didn't do background checks, right? And so he would go in, but eventually it would come out, right? That, we live in a pretty small, it's not a small town, but it's certainly not a big city either. So it would come out, he'd get fired, he'd come home devastated. I'd be devastated, and it was just like this roller coaster of emotions. And he suffered so much depression and I just wasn't prepared for it. So it was really, a challenging time. And so that's another reason that I'm pretty passionate about helping on the reentry side, because I just got to see through his eyes just how challenging that process really is. I mean, for me, I was just so excited. My son's coming home, right? So it was going to be all sunshine and bluebirds. And it wasn't. And I think families and individuals who are incarcerated need to be prepared that it's going to be hard. That doesn't mean you should give up, but you need to be realistic about the challenges you're going to face.
Yeah, I've often thought about trying to start an online support group for families that are having somebody coming home because there are so many things that you do not think of. Like you might cook their favorite meal that you think, oh, they haven't had this in 8 years, and just the smell of it makes them sick. It's like all that scent, like I went crazy cleaning and the first thing was, "Oh, it smells like bleach and it's giving me a headache," and colors, you paint something new and bright and it's like that overstimulation
Yeah.
is just
Yeah, I mean, for
incredible.
my son, it was also like being financially responsible. I mean, when he went to prison the first time, he was barely 20 years old. And so, he really never had an opportunity to kind of establish financial responsibility. And so when he came home, I had money that I had saved for him. And I, took him and we set up a bank account and I moved the money over to that bank account. That money was gone in
Yeah.
maybe a month. And so I didn't realize like how much he just didn't understand the real world and how to save money and be responsible. And so that was really hard.
Yeah, and those are programs that really should be put in place before they come home. There's a lot of financial intelligence type groups that are starting in prisons now and trying to tell them, even if you save $1 a month, and that's a lot of money sometimes in prison,
Sure.
but
Sure.
if you can get disciplined enough to do that, then you've already created that habit before you come home. Yeah. And the other thing is wants and needs. It's, when you've gone without having anything for so long,
Yes.
everything is something that you want, and that's where you can really get in trouble, as
Yep.
far as your finances go.
Yep.
Well, Paula, we're coming up on the end of the show here. Is there anything else that you would like to say before we wrap things up?
I guess, for the individuals watching, I guess I just pray that they won't give up hope. I'm a big believer in, part of the reason that I do prison ministry is I want to make sure I'm bringing hope to those individuals who are incarcerated, that no matter how bleak it may seem, that there is nothing that's impossible for God, and just to never give up hope. And I know that, programs like this on their tablets, there's a lot more opportunities on their tablets for them to watch programs like this and educational programs and things like that. That they should take every opportunity to better themselves, to learn more, to read more. I follow a lot of people on LinkedIn who are in, kind of this reentry space, correction space. And one of the individuals on there said that preparation for coming home from prison should start on day one. And so I think that's so important. And, hey, if you're someone who's already been down for 2, 3, 4 years and you haven't done it, it's not too late to start. Right. And so, that would be kind of I always just try to make sure that I close with encouraging words.
I appreciate that so much, and I am so thankful that you came on today and talked with us and shared your story with our listeners because I really feel that we are making a difference. And one of the things in my mission statement is to restore hope. And I want to piggyback on that, that there is always hope. There are people out here that believe in you. We really believe in you. We believe in change and we believe in forgiveness. And let's hope that you have those people in your life too. Thank you so much for joining us again for another edition of the Prison Pod. We'll be back in another week.
You have been listening to the Prison Pod, a podcast not just for those in prison but for anyone who has been affected by incarceration. Ms. Valerie would love for you to write to her with your questions, comments, and show ideas. The address is Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine. 04473.